All right. Good morning, everybody. Glad to finally be back to give you guys some content. We're going to dive back into what we were talking about before everything went crazy. And so for this segment, we're going to actually we're going to go back and we're going to review what we were talking about when it came to Satan. You guys remember what we were doing? We were talking about the three big spiritual categories, spiritual beings. We talked about God, we talked about his attributes, the fact that he's sovereign, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. That category, we talked about him and how we sort of interact with him a little bit. We're talking about who Satan is, what that means for us as Christians, how we interact with him, and then or what that means in terms of our own personal lives. And then we're going to talk about angels and demons here in the upcoming weeks. And so talking about Satan right now, we're going to go back to what we were talking about prior. We're going to revisit what we were doing was we're going to go back and talk about there are three specific enemies that we fight against as a saved person, as a Christian, one that has put their faith in Jesus Christ. If we go back, I read Ephesians 6:10 through 12, which states, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." So if you guys remember, we talked about the fact that there are three specific enemies that we're fighting against. We have Satan, demons, and our flesh. Okay, and we'll dive into the latter two here in a few weeks. But when we talk about Satan, I want to describe the fact that similar to God, and we didn't talk too deeply about this in terms of God. I mentioned it a little bit, but the same goes for the devil or Satan, is the fact that he is merely referred to as a plethora of different names, which refer to different things about him. So we talked about the fact that devil is one of his names. It's the Greek word diablos, which is referring to Satan as the slanderer against both God to man and man to God. So we see Satan slandering man before God in Job 1 and 2, where Satan is slandering Job, saying, no, this man doesn't actually believe in you and have faith in you and trust you. It's only because you give him stuff. And then in Genesis 3:4 through 5, he is slandering God to man when he says to the woman, "You surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing God, good and evil." Thus, we see Satan slandering God before man. And then we talked about the fact that he is referred to as Satan, which means adversary, enemy, or opposition. Satan has been the chief instigator, initiator, and perpetuator of evil aggression, both against and within the purposes and plans of God. So Isaiah 14:12 through 15 says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn, you have been cut down to the earth. You have weakened the nations, but you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Nevertheless, you will thrust down to Sheol, to the recesses of the pit." And we'll actually get into that next week, but that's referring to the position of, or not the position, sorry, the falling of Satan, because Satan is a fallen angel, and he is this chief instigator that brought other fallen angels with him, who are demons. Like I said, we'll get into those later, but he is the one who's perpetuating evil here on earth. And then the last one we talked about was God of this world. By God's sovereign ordinance, Satan is the superior power, but he's not a deity of this age. This title comes by virtue of his position, but not by nature. So, and And it all began in Eden and will continue this way until the curse is reversed at the end of the age. When Jesus comes back, Satan is thrown into the pits of hell. So, and we see in 2 Corinthians 4:3-4, and it says, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, and in those in whose case the God of this world, being Satan, has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that they may not see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So when he's referring to God of this world, it's Satan is this perpetuator of darkness, which blinds us, or blinds humanity from the light of who God is, the truth of who God is. So that's more about just who Satan is, and it's a really quick recap of what we were talking about beforehand on just who he was. I'm going to show you guys a quick video, which I wasn't actually able to show you beforehand, of the Bible Project. We're going to watch their segment on describing who Satan is, go a little bit deeper, and I want to show you guys a compare and contrast of Satan to Christ. And I'll leave you guys with that, and you guys can look over that, and we'll start diving deeper into that as in the next couple weeks, because I specifically want to pit our interactions with Christ and the fact that Satan is the antithesis. He's trying to fight against who Christ is, because Christ came and completely obliterated Satan's plans to bring people away from who God is. So with that, I'm going to show you guys this video. There it is.
So we've been learning about spiritual beings in the Bible, and I still have a lot of questions about the bad ones.
Well, great. Let's talk about the Satan and demons in the story of the Bible. So let's start in the beginning. In Genesis 1, God creates a beautiful, ordered reality out of darkness and disorder so that life can flourish. He appoints humans as his representatives to rule over all of it, and 7 times God calls it good.
Yeah, I experience that kind of goodness often in the world, in things like beauty and truth, love and generosity.
But in Genesis 3, we meet a creature who's in a state of rebellion against his creator. We're not told yet why or how he rebels, but he's on a mission to ruin God's good world for other creatures.
This thing is trouble.
Yeah, this creature is the Bible's first portrait of evil. It distorts what God has purposed for good, ruining and dragging creation back into darkness and disorder.
So the humans join the spiritual rebel, which leads them back into chaos and death.
And from this point on, the human rebellion is interwoven with a spiritual rebellion. And the biblical story shows how this happens over and over again.
Okay, but wait, we're getting all this from a slithering snake?
Well, there are clues in the story that it's more than just a snake. Remember, Eden is a high place where the earth and its creatures overlap with heaven and its creatures.
So the snake could be a spiritual being.
Well, Genesis 3 points in that direction, and then later biblical authors fill in the picture. Like when the prophet Isaiah has a vision of God's heavenly throne room, he's surrounded and being praised by the spiritual beings.
Yeah, these are the cherubim around God's throne.
But when Isaiah sees these creatures, he describes them as seraphim, which in Hebrew means snake.
So the snake is like a former staff member in God's throne room. So why is he talking to the humans?
Well, the prophet Ezekiel understood this figure as a spiritual rebel who didn't want to live under God's wisdom and authority. He wanted to be God.
All right, that's the same temptation the snake puts before Adam and Eve.
Exactly. He says they could rule the world like God, but by their own wisdom.
So they're all kicked out of the garden.
Yeah, God says this rebel will now crawl on its belly.
Where does it go after this?
Well, the biblical authors offer subtle clues where this being is at work behind the scenes, animating division and hatred between humans. They also use a variety of images to describe this being. It's a snake, or a sea dragon, or a dark desert creature, or the king of death and the grave. He's also given many titles, like Tempter, or the Evil One, or the Devil, which in Greek means the slanderer.
But his name is Satan, right?
Actually, no. Satan is not a name. It's another one of these titles, which is why in Hebrew it has the word the in front of it. The Satan means the adversary, because he isn't for anything, rather he's anti-everything. working through lies to drag us back into darkness and disorder.
That's intense. Now, what about these other spiritual rebels in the Bible?
All right. So we'll get into those a little bit later. I'll probably show you guys the rest of that video. Just they do a good job at explaining that, and it kind of shows the fact and how we'll transition into how our interactions with Satan. We are not directly fighting Satan. He's not omnipresent. We talked about how God is everywhere and that God is all powerful. Satan is not those things. Satan is a fallen angel. He can be anywhere, but he is not everywhere. So he is more this chief instigator, and we're going to dive a little bit more into that as we continue on talking about him. So the last thing I want to show you guys is this table, and I believe I showed you guys before. It's pitting Satan against Christ. So where Satan is temporal or temporary, Christ is eternal. Where Satan is darkness, Christ is light, and so far and so forth. So if you guys are able to take a picture of that, look at that. We're going to go through this in more detail and look at these things and how Christ is the complete fulfillment to completely obliterate him from this earth and his power. That us in Christ, we are able to overcome his power, Satan's power here on this earth. So with that, I want to thank you all for being able to join me. And I'm going to be working on getting more content out more effectively. I apologize for the delay, but we're back. So yeah, miss you guys, and I can't wait to be able to see you guys again. Bye.